Hello, everybody. Gail Craft here from the Empowering Process podcast. We are going to be listening to my guest, Jeff Sera, Sera, as he talks about living through trauma and how he actually healed and now helps others through his energy healing, Reiki, master level ability. Amazing man, amazing story. I know you're going to enjoy this as much as I did.
Hello, everybody. Gail Craft here from the Empowering Process podcast. And I have with me a gentleman called Jeff Sera, Sera. And Jeff is the founder of, what's that company name? Food for the number 4 thought. And Jeff is very, very concerned about personal development being part of your physical development process. Did I get that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, everything is hand in hand, right? So our
Everything.
mental affects our physical.
Yes. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of some of the things that I'm doing with the physical challenges that I'm under right now. So Jeff, welcome. And you're going to be sharing, we're going to be going crazy, guys. So we're going to talk about pain, but we're going to talk about woo too. So if you're not in the mood for woo woo, bye. So, Jeff, one of the things that you put down is that you have a story to share with us about trauma, suppressing emotions, grief. That's a powerful, packed synopsis of heavy baggage that most of us carry, right? Most of us carry, right? So talk to me a little bit about what what some of that trauma was like for you and what carrying that before you realized that it was time to let it go. What was that like?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, just to warn your listeners, this is a little graphic. It's a little I'm just gonna be raw and real with what it
Thank
was.
you. Yep.
So when I was 15, one of my ex-girlfriends got pregnant. And we were very young, very immature, and not ready for any of that. And so we decided to have an abortion. And I went with her to Planned Parenthood, and I was there when she underwent the procedure. And I could still vividly recall like her squeezing my hand with just a death grip and screaming her lungs out, just in pain. And the process they had back then was I don't know what the machine was, but it was literally like a vacuum and a glass jar.
Ugh.
And they fill up this glass jar with everything they removed from her. And I can still like visualize this vial of what was my unborn child. And at 15, I didn't have peers that had undergone the same experience. I wasn't given any tools and really how to cope with that or process it. I just remember a lot of very sinking feeling, like regret and like how do you undo something like this in multiple ways, right? Like the moment she called me and said, "Hey, I'm pregnant," it was like, how do we go back in time and undo that, right? Then it was after that process, it was like, how do I get that out of my mind? Um, and I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the knowledge. I was just like, yeah, I don't know what to do with this. So I pushed it down. I suppressed it as best I could, and I walked around with a scowl on my face where I was just upset. The things that people around me were like bothered by or dealing with just seemed so irrelevant to me at that point. And so I shoved everything down, and my coping mechanism at the time was to distract myself. And this is when AIM, the AOL Instant Messenger, had come out. And so instead of doing my homework, I would be chatting with friends on AIM, and I would ask them how their lives were going. I would dive into what was happening for them to avoid thinking about what I was dealing with or what was present in my life. And I did that for quite some time, pretty much all of high school, a good amount of college. And I continued to avoid feelings, to avoid doing any inner work. So I became kind of stagnant in my own growth, but I was able to support a lot of people around me. I was able to listen to and empathize with other people's struggles. And it became a skill set of mine, but it was also a coping mechanism where I was
I was going to
avoiding.
say it's a distraction.
Yeah.
I find, and so I'll interrupt you here on two counts. I find many coaches who are in it to help others do it in order to avoid their own pain,
Yeah.
right? So the help that they provide is kind of tainted and toxic as well. Number one. And number two, this is a very important message for people to understand that it's not just the woman that goes through trauma. Yes, she also had the physical experience, right? But the emotional trauma and not having someone to help you navigate through it and suppressing it means it gets to nicely grow and ferment.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't know how to feel about that, right? Because on one hand, I'm not the one that experienced it, but I did have an experience with it. I was there, I was present. Um, and it was a part of my experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
But feeling kind of almost shameful for having it affect me the way it did, it was like, well, what about for her, right? So there was a level of like suppression even further where like, I can't talk about this, I can't express this because I'm just going to get um I don't know what, like the judgment from it would be harder to bear. And so yeah, I avoided that. And when I was in college, it happened again. I had another girlfriend, she got pregnant, and we went through the same thing, but this time, because I hadn't dealt with and healed the first wound, I was terrified, and I didn't know that. And I did everything I could to avoid. We had actually already broken up. And so when she went to her appointment, I didn't go. She went alone. And I projected onto her, and I was just upset. She scheduled it for a time that I had another commitment. I had a date planned with somebody else, and I turned that fear into resentment for her, and I blamed her and all these things. And afterwards, I carried so much guilt because I knew what she went through alone. Um, and I fell into self beat up, shame, guilt, all those things to be like, how could you do that? You know what that's like. You've been there before, and you made her go alone. And from that point forward, I then made myself readily available to anybody that would need me, because in my mind, I said, I've committed an atrocity. And the only way to make up for that is to um, try to find a way to never have someone need me and then not be there. So my phone would always be on the highest ring possible. People knew they could call me at any time of the day or night because I would pick up and I would be there for people. And it was my way to try to make up for what I had done in my past. And again, I didn't have the proper tools or the knowledge on how to really process that or deal with it. So again, I pushed down the feelings around it. And again, the things I'm sharing right now is consciousness I gained much later in life. During the time, I was completely unaware. I was just upset. Um, and so, yeah, like that was the second point in my life where it pushed me away from feeling my feelings and emotions and suppressing something, but also pushed me towards the coaching aspect and developing that skill set where it was like, yeah, I don't want to deal with this. Dive into other people's lives, see how you can support them. Um, but at the same time, I'm only able to bring them as far as I've gone. And so a little bit later, probably my mid 20s, I realized like, okay, what really had happened, what was going on with me, and realizing that these were things I never dealt with. These were wounds that had never been healed. And I carried that with me in this heavy sense of guilt and shame um, into my late 20s. And that's when I started to kind of reflect on some things and say, okay, well, like, what would I even do? How do you heal from something like that? How do you make up for that, right? How do you apologize? And who do you apologize to? Right. I've got two unborn children and two women that have been affected by this. At that point, I don't remember the conversations that had been had, but it just felt incomplete. Now, what really brought things to light for me was in 2017, I had a lot of family pass away. Um, I had one aunt who was in a car accident the week before her daughter's wedding. So my cousin was having a destination wedding, And the week before, she was in a head-on collision with a drunk driver that was going southbound on the northbound side of the freeway. So they collided head on. And my dad was on the phone with my aunt at the time when it happened. And so he heard the impact. And because they had hit each other head on, there was a second impact because a semi truck came and couldn't see the wreckage because there was no lights. So there's a second impact that my dad heard, and then it was just silence. And so he heard my aunt pass away on the phone the week before my cousin's wedding. And when that news reached me, I was just in shock. I was numb. And again, I had no tools in how to process this type of thing. And I was kind of I was in a loop, or just kind of stuck and complacent in life. I had been working for a web security company for, at this time, probably about 5 years. And it was just going through the motions. I had no passion for the job. It was just kind of clock in, clock out. And I was also partying a lot at this time. And so when that happened, it was like, okay, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to think about that. This is a terrible thing. Let's distract myself. And so I leaned heavy into partying, smoking a lot of weed, and always being around people, because anytime I was alone at any point would be all these things, all these sad things that I'd suppressed for most of my life would come up. I'm like, oh, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to think about that. So what can I do? I found myself always calling people if there was like a lull, or if I was on my way home, knowing that I had nothing to do. It was like, okay, well, where can I stop on the way back? Because I don't want to be by myself. I don't want to be alone with my thoughts. And so, yeah, that was one incident that year, and then two more incidents with family where they had passed away in ways that were very surprising. And so when again, these things happen, and it was like, I'm avoiding it and pressing it all down and just suppressing it, like not wanting to face it. It coiled up, and it became like a spring, right? Like all these things that I just suppressed for so long. And then I realized one day, I'm like, wow, I'm fucked up. Like I was like, I can't cry. Right. I'd been to 3 funerals that year, and it was like, what's going on? Like, I didn't cry at the funerals. I didn't grieve. I didn't have the time to process because I avoided it for so long. And then after a certain amount of time, I was like, wow, I never took the time to grieve that. So then I was trying to be intentional, be like, okay, let's try to like process that. And then I couldn't, because so much time had passed, where it's like that moment of feeling the feeling had gone away, but now it was just trapped deeper where I couldn't reach it. And so I'm like, I cannot cry. And I realized for about 5 years, I wasn't able to cry. And so in 2017, when these things happened, I was like, wow, like I need to try to figure something out. And I had a friend that was going to these meditation classes. So I was like, hey, can I tag along? Something. And I hadn't done any formal meditation, right? It was, in my mind, meditation was clearing your mind and imagining yourself in a white room, just nothing, like no thoughts.
Sure.
It's what I've come to realize is that's like the highest level of meditation to be able to do that. So I was like starting at the advanced level. And so when I went with her, it was a guided meditation. I was like, okay, this is a lot easier. Like you're following along, you're listening to somebody else kind of mentally guide you. I can do this. So I went to a couple sessions, and one of them ended up being a sound bowl Reiki session. And I'm like, I know nothing about any of this. I'm completely uneducated in it. So it's like, sure, let's go. And the lady that was hosting the class went around, and she's like, I'm going to do a little bit of Reiki on people. I'm not going to make any contact. So just continue to meditate. Cool. And when she came around to me, she's like, hey, I'm feeling something here. I know I said I wouldn't make any contact, but do you mind if I do? I feel compelled. And I'm like, I have no idea what's going on, lady. Sure. Like, do whatever you need to do. I'm just here. And so she did whatever she did. And then she came around and she just gently taps my forehead. And the moment she tapped it, like, it felt like my sinuses had cleared, but like deeper in my head. And it was just this like breath of fresh air. I was like, whoa, like, I don't know what just happened. I don't know what she just did, but I felt a sensation. And I was just like I didn't know how to explain it, but it was like, yeah, like there was an undeniable sensation that happened. Something happened when she made contact. And I left that just kind of like bewildered, like, oh, that was interesting. And yeah, from that point on, I just started to notice shifts in things, and things were happening around me. And I started to feel really weird all the time. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I started to feel like I wasn't sure what my emotions were. I was getting these weird sensations of like hot and cold. I would like shake sometimes in public, and I'm like shivers almost. And I'm like, why? It's not cold. Why am I feeling like this? So just strange things. And I have a really good friend that is an acupuncturist. And so she had been, sometimes doing treatments, and then we would be talking about these stuff, and she would start to guide me and be like, oh, that's interesting. And without telling me too much, she would just kind of listen, but kind of give just enough comfort. Um, and so I didn't realize that she was kind of guiding me. And at some point, I remember just being like, what the fuck is going on? So I started Googling stuff, and I came across like a YouTube video of like 10 signs of a kundalini awakening. Like, oh, what's this? And I'm listening, and I'm like, this, like, okay, half of this sounds similar to my experience. The other half sounds batshit crazy. Like, that's not what's happening.
So let me stop you there for a minute, because I had a roommate who experienced that, to the point where she was hallucinating for 3 days. She didn't sleep. She ate. She finally went out. This was in San Diego, went out and walked the park barefoot so that she could get grounded and get back to earth. Right? That's one of the problems with that type of meditation. And then, go on your way. Okay, we're done. No, I just started something that you have no idea. Go experience it, right? You, wow. Okay, so you found out that you were starting to go through a Kundalini experience. Explain to people what that meant.
Well, it was interesting, right? Because it was like half of this list of 10 things. Half of them were like, okay, sounds like that's kind of what's my experience is, but it wasn't 100%. So then I kind of just forgot about it. I was like, well, that's kind of could be it, but not really. And this is all new to me. So I'm like, that's just some woo shit. I'm not going to invest too much time in it. And then forgot about it, went back to my life, and just carried on as normal as best I could. Right. And then in 2020, when COVID happened, we're in lockdown, right? We're stuck at home. I'm like going stir crazy. I'm bored. I started to experiment with mushrooms. Playing around with that, and then just like, yeah, like, okay, well, we have nothing to do, we're stuck at home, let's do this. I didn't realize there was also a holistic effect to that, and that it can, tap you into other things. I was taking it recreationally and just to kill the time.
Oh yeah, doing that without the guidance of someone who's trained is not. Boy, you really took some bad turns, man.
Oh, it was a rough journey.
Yeah.
And so at some point I just started to think differently, right? I was paying attention to what was happening just around us in the planet. And it was like, this doesn't add up. And so I'm starting to like look at things from an outside of the box perspective, even more so than I had always carried in my life. And seeing different patterns and realizations. And like, it was as if I had like just this one of these boards, like on I don't know, like a FBI show where they got all these pictures up, and then all the red strings connecting. It was like all these things were connecting. I'm like, oh wow, like
Oh, a
just these,
crime scene board, right?
right. Like, oh, if you do this in life, this also correlates over here. And it's like, and that creates who you are as a person. And just all these things were unraveling and understanding, like in the bigger picture of my understanding of existence and all these things. And so I'm like, okay, what is happening? Like, again, my mind is just firing in a way that it didn't work the same way before. And then I'm like, oh, what was that thing I found like several years ago, right? That Kundalini thing. Let me look that up again. And so I find another list, and this one is like 28 signs of a Kundalini awakening. And I'm sitting there reading it, and I'm like, 26 out of 28 have been spot on. My experience the last 3 years, this is exactly what I've been feeling. And it started to explain everything. And I was like, oh, so that thing that happened before when the lady tapped my head, I think started this process. And over time, I started to like really become extremely empathetic, to a point that it was like I lost myself. And I was just, when I go out in public in large crowds, I would vibrate because I'm feeling so much of what other people around me are feeling. When I would spend time with certain friends, I could feel any negative energy. I could feel any jealousy, any resentment, anything getting
Hurts, doesn't it hurt?
yeah. And I'm like, this is one of my closest friends. Like, what the hell? Like, and it's like, I don't know how to explain that. Like, I can feel what you're not saying. And it's more than just reading between the lines and body language. And it was like, I can't unknow what I'm knowing, but I can't explain how I know it.
Right?
And then it
That's
put me in this,
because you know.
yeah, yeah. It put me in this weird place. Like, I want to have a conversation to clear the air, but I don't even know how to begin that, because it's like, then I'm like, am I projecting an insecurity, or is this something I intuitively know? And how do I describe that to someone I've never had this conversation with?
Oh, I know. And I'll tell you, I will say to someone, I'm feeling that you're feeling a little resentful right now.
Mm.
And I'll get, no, no. And then okay. Then it's time to like just walk away. Okay.
The
Right?
defensiveness. Yeah.
Yep. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you really can't say anything.
Yeah. I had to set, like, I just stepped away from pretty much everybody in my life. I had to like isolate myself as best I could. And again, this was during COVID, so it was a lot easier. But it was, yeah, it was intense. And it was like, what is happening? And then I started to notice, right? Because I had set myself up in my life where I made myself available to people. So when they were having heavy times or wanting to vent or grieve, it was welcome that they could come to me for that. And so I was taking on and absorbing a lot of negative energy. And part of it, I didn't really consciously realize was, I think what I understand now is when I'm present with people, especially if I make physical contact, I absorb about half of the weight they're carrying. And what I've learned to do now is to release it and, do empath clearings and cleansings to release that energy back out just into the ether, the universe, so that I'm not carrying and they're not carrying it.
So
And
how did you clear the guilt and the shame of that experience that sent you down the rabbit hole to begin with?
that was through shadow work, through my own shadow work, self-compassion, through recognizing like, hey, yeah, like today I'm recognizing that if it had happened today, I would choose something different because I'm better equipped. I have different tools. I'm in a different place in life. But at where I was during that time, I have compassion for that version of myself to be like, yeah, he was a kid. He didn't know any better. He was scared. He didn't have guidance in this area. And so, he made the best decision he thought was the right thing at the time.
So explain
Um,
to me what your experience of shadow work was. I've done some shadow work training, and I'm very much um, a fan of the abyss.
um, yeah. So through meditations, both guided and I'll put on like whether it's frequency or just background noise or like water. I
Frequency,
like
yeah.
the sound of like flowing water. So depending on kind of the level of work I'm trying to do, I'll pick
Hmm.
one of those. If I want to just let the thoughts roll, I'll put something on with without any words, so no guided meditation, and just kind of sit in the reflection of it and take a deep dive to, okay, what am I thinking about this thing? What's my relationship to it? What are the emotions that come up? And then realizing and recognizing like, oh wow, like I feel a lot of shame and guilt from that thing. There's a song that I listen to whenever this comes up where I kind of feel attached to it. It's called Happy Birthday by Flipside. And it's a song about kind of wishing happy birthday to the unborn child. And recognizing, kind of every year I kind of go through this thing of like counting back time and like, oh shit, I would have like an 18-year-old child right now. And so that song brings back those sensations to be able to drop in and be like, yeah, like I'm feeling these levels of anger towards having that experience and not like society not having guidance for me, right? Like people that were in my sphere knew enough about this to be like, hey, maybe there's some type of professional help that could support you, but that was never provided to me, right? So anger and resentment in that area, the feeling of the guilt around taking a life and that I would have had an adult child, or not even a child, an adult human being at this point. Recognizing that there was blame on my partner, blame on the fact of, or the company that, the condom that we use that broke, uh, projecting all these things at the same time. And then recognizing that, yeah, like back then, what was my experience? I didn't have these tools. So what did I do? Oh, I dove into helping other people. So taking the time to really sit in that and reflect on how it affected me then, how it affected me afterwards, and how it affects me today. And through some of that work, I've come up with my own process for healing, and I've got 5 stages. So awareness is number one, being aware of whatever the wound is. Number two is accepting it, accepting that it happened and that you can't undo it. The third is forgiveness. So forgiveness of the other parties involved, and including yourself. And the self-compassion to be like, hey, yeah, like here's something I wish I could undo, but I can't. And I'm also grateful because it made me who I am today. So compassion in the sense that it doesn't define who I am, but it is a part of who I am. The fourth stage is acceptance again. So accepting that this is always going to be a part of me, the same way like a scar on your body is always going to be a part of you. It may stop hurting as much, but it will always be present. And the fifth stage is getting comfortable with revisiting this over and over and over again. And what I mean by that is, as we grow and learn, our perspective and our knowledge changes. So when we go back and we revisit these old wounds, we learn something new from it. So I did this not too long ago. For my birthday, the way I celebrated was I did very intentional deep shadow work with the support of psilocybin, because I had been avoiding it for quite some time. But I was like, I'm going to do a deep dive. It's going to be terrible because I'm going to look at the parts of myself I'm unhappy with. And when I did that, this topic came up again. And I was like, okay, so why is this present in my life? Why is this a topic that I keep bringing up and talking about when I'm doing this work? And it was like, oh, I'm still carrying some of that guilt. I'm still carrying some of that emotional baggage from before. Even though I've done this work probably 3 or 4 times, it was like, there's still more to unpack. And so again, that fifth stage of getting comfortable revisiting it, because it's never something you can just pick up and remove from your experience. It's always going to be tied to who we are and how we think and operate. And so realizing that that was still something that I had to go in and do a deeper level of compassion and forgiveness to myself for, was what came up not too long ago. And it was like, okay, here's some of the work, and recognizing that there's still this level of I always try to get this word wrong, self-flagration, kind of like the
yeah.
right.
So,
Yeah.
So here's what's interesting, Jeff. So what happens in my experience, I'm just going to talk about my experience. When
Please.
I make a significant shift in my awareness, because that, it jumps every once in a while, I go through a death. And the death is what happens when you die. Your life passes before you. And so I'll have, well, why am I remembering that? But now, because I've done so much with the abyss, the dark work, right? That it's like, all right, so that happened. Okay. Right. And then the other, yes, all right, so that happened. Right. Right. So it's now just like a movie.
Watching it back.
Right, that passes before me, but it happens, and it's different memories that will pop up. But when they pop up now, I'm like, oh, I'm ready to take a jump. Okay, let's go. Right. And
So this is
so,
your process for when you're doing shadow work. You'll have like some type of like maybe an ego death, and then your life plays, and then you'll see something, be like, oh, that's going to be relevant some way, how, some shape or
right.
form.
And I don't do it on purpose. It's
Mm,
like when I'm going through a transformation that I start to think of these moments in my life. And I now recognize that because it's happened so many times that, oh, I'm going through another transformation. Cool. Let's see
yeah.
who I become.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's all about becoming self-aware at a level that is not explainable. That's like you knowing that someone is feeling a certain way, right? I will feel like you do, or see something, whoa, okay, I get that. And then I will ask, do I bring it up? And if I do, how do I bring it up?
Mm,
Right? And if the answer is no, I'm like, okay. I won't bring it up. Or if the answer is yes, okay, help me frame this. And I usually frame it in the form of questions. Right. So what would happen if you blah 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 instead of blah 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 blah. Right. So that I'm not providing solutions. I'm offering a different way of looking at something.
Yeah.
right? Because that's what's happening. You're looking at things from different perspectives,
Yeah.
right? And you're starting to see different truths.
It's like that transformation gives you a new lens and you have a new
Yeah,
perspective on something.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I now know that if I didn't have the experiences I had in my life, some of the conversations with people I work with would not be as genuine,
Mm.
right? Because I can talk about emotional and now physical trauma, whereas in the past, or if I hadn't gone through some of this stuff, I would be just talking like a psychiatrist talks from a textbook and not from experience,
Yeah. Yeah. To be
right?
able to share that, to be like, yeah, like I know what you're feeling and experiencing, and it feels crazy, but you're not losing your mind. This is
Right?
something.
Or you don't even have to say that you know you because people know if you're being genuine or not, right? So one of the things, so I wrote down, um we were talking earlier about the fact that you now combined, body and soul, right? Food, for thought, right? And so I'm about ready. Friday, I meet with an oncologist and about ready to go through chemo. And the universe put me on a plant-based diet before I knew there was a problem. The universe actually pushed me towards a lot of things before I knew there was a diagnosis that was coming my way. And so I was already on a plant-based diet. I already had chemo hats. I already had a network of support. I'm not kidding. The kind of stuff that I was told to do. And so on the plant-based diet, I have certain foods that I eat. So a friend of mine I talked with the other day said, here's a link to where you can get a diet for preparing your body for chemo. It's everything that I'm doing. It's
All the
plant-based.
food you have, yeah.
Except that it has broth, and what's funny is the universe pushed me towards getting some bone broth, and I laughed and I said, that's not plant-based, but okay. Right. So I kind of tease, it's because it's a communication, it's a relationship,
Yeah.
right? It's just like I'm relating to you. You relate to those conversations that you're having. And so I will joke. They love to joke, right? They love to play, right? We take life so seriously, and they're like, "Hey guys, lighten up.
Yeah.
This is just an experiment. This is just, it's not. This isn't the real you. This is, an avatar. You're an avatar. The real you is still connected, right? So anyway, so I thought that was, except for the fish. Fish is on that list, and
Oh,
I don't eat fish, so I might be adding that just 2 times. They say 2 times a week to have fish. But I take omega oil, so I might be just fine.
okay. So
Yeah.
on Friday you have an appointment.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Right. Right. So tell me about your now. So you've gone through the Kundalini experience, and guys, look it up and don't do it alone, please, because it's dangerous. It's very powerful and it's very dangerous if you do it alone. Um, and you now are in this business where you're coaching people, mind and body and soul. Talk about that.
Yeah. So again, right, I recognized that in school I was not taught any of this.
No?
My home life, I wasn't taught any of this by my parents. So it was like, okay, so this is all extremely relevant because life is going to happen. And how do we process that? How do we deal with that? Especially when we're not given the tools. So recognizing that, people need guidance, especially for something along the lines of like a Kundalini. Had I not had my mentor, I would have thought I was losing my mind. Like,
You are losing your mind without guidance. Hmm.
and I was thinking, right, like I could compare myself to somebody that is like schizophrenic or something, just like talking out of their ass. Like it sounds like nonsense, but under the right perspective, it's like, no, that is your experience right now, and it's tied to these things. And that's what my mentor was able to guide me through. So I'm grateful for that. And recognizing that, there is a gap in the knowledge that we're provided with. And so looking into how can I take the skill set I've developed through my own avoidance and escape mechanism. So my greatest weakness, which was avoiding things, became my greatest strength, where it was like, well, because I avoided it, I developed a skill set in how to support other people.
Right.
But I'm only able to take people as far as I've gone. So it was like, okay, I really have to do my own work here and level myself up in order to continue to do that for others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took some time very intentionally to do that for myself, where it was recognizing, right, like the mind, the body, the soul, all of it is interconnected. And if one area is unhealthy, then the others will follow suit. At the same time, the compound effect is true, where if you start to make those improvements and develop yourself in one area, the others will also follow suit. And so breaking it down for myself into bite-sized tasks and just continuing to be self-aware and recognize anytime I'm doing anything to self-sabotage or with a negative vibration, right? Like recognizing when there's anger or resentment or projection, and then where is that coming from? And being able to break that down into layman's terms. As I've been doing this work, I've connected to a lot of people that are in this realm of spirituality, holistic practices, and all those things. But there's a huge disconnect between that demographic and the one that I came from, where this was all just nonsense. So then it's like, how do you kind of merge the two to bring this more so to the masses, to be like, hey, this is a thing, guys. We can choose to ignore it, but it's present.
It's real. It's not woo.
Yeah. So like people joke about Mercury in retrograde, right? Like, oh, the Gatorade thing is happening again, right? And I remember having a conversation with somebody, and it was like, okay, well, do you believe in Wi-Fi? And he's like, yeah, like I use it on my phone all the time. It's like, well, can you see it? No, but you believe that it exists and it has an effect on you. It's like, yeah. Like, okay, well, when the planets align in certain ways, do you believe that there could be a specific gravitational magnetic pull that could affect things on this planet, including our electronics? Like, oh shit, that makes some sense. It's like, well, that's what we're talking about, right? It's not as woo-woo when you actually break it down and put a little bit of like scientific evidence behind it. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then when you start to talk about energy, right? Like every piece of matter is vibrating, it's energy. And then that's where kind of Reiki came into play for me, where it was like, oh, like this is something that has been kind of present in me that I wasn't really aware of. And I think part of the Kundalini awakening that started to bring that alive in me as well, where I started to explore that and experiment with it and then look for formal training in it. And as I went through formal training, it was like, oh, like certain aspects of this have been intuition for me, or something I've been doing, even before having the Kundalini awakening, and just something that I thought was human nature.
We knew as children. I can remember astral projecting as a child when I was really sick and watching my body and making sure that I was safe.
Oh, cool.
Just floating up and watching me and thinking that was normal. And there are a few other strange, some people would think strange things that I did as a child that, I never questioned it. I thought that everyone did this.
Yeah.
Right. One of them was I would travel the neighborhood as a black cat and check out my neighbors to make sure they were okay. And I realized that I was actually physically creating a black cat avatar when a friend of mine one morning said, "Did you peek in my window last night?" And I said, "Well, yes, I was checking on you." And she said, "Don't do it again. You scared the shit out of me." So is this true? Right?
Yeah.
So there's so much that we don't know. Rather than close our minds to, well, that's BS. Why not be curious about, well, but if it were true, what would that look like?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like how would that appear for us?
Yeah. One of the things I experimented with today, because life is an experiment, is string theory. Have you heard of string theory?
I've heard of remind me.
So string theory is the concept that there are multiple realities going on at the same time.
Okay.
And we hop from reality to reality, right? By the choices that we make. And so we can leapfrog into, a different
Parallel.
reality, a parallel reality of us. So I did an experiment on that, whereas, in a meditation, I went down a hallway and there were all my like almost in like glass cages of the me's in the different realities, right? To choose one that I wanted to take back with me. Like, I want that person to be here, right? And that person is, I have a dragon rider, right? That's a whole other story, that I am a dragon rider, but I found her, right, in this meditation, and I'm like, oh honey, you're coming with me, right? You're coming with me because you are both loving and powerful,
Mm.
right? And your job is to circle the community with love to be sure it's safe. And I want to bring that back with me.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And so one of the things that I have said, so some people might be like, I'm shutting this thing out. I want to explain one thing to you. I did timeline work a long time ago with someone, and when you do timeline work, you like, what's the incident? Was it past, before, during, or after birth? And so I was explaining to her what we're going to do, and she said, I don't believe in past lives. I said, you may not believe in past lives, but your brain is going to take you to whatever reality it wants to take you to, so that it can tell you this story in a way that you feel safe. So it may say this happened 5 lifetimes ago, because it will take you that much space in order to face the root cause of your fear, or the root cause of whatever it is that we're dealing on. If you don't believe in past lives, at least believe that your mind is going to do whatever it needs to do to make you feel safe for the journey you're going on. She bought
Okay.
that. She bought that, and she went into a past life.
Ooh.
Right? Right? So you've got your past lives, and if it's past lives, is it yours or is it genealogy? If it's genealogy, is it your father's line or is it your mother's line? If it's your mother's line, how far back? Right? Because we carry the sins of our fathers and mothers 7 generations. And so when we do timeline work and clear something, we clear it going back as well as going forward, and we clear our ancestral energy. You're thinking about that for a minute. Everything is energy.
Yeah. No. No. The 7. Would you say the 7?
The seven, yeah, yeah, it's 7 generations.
Yeah. I met my biological grandpa this year,
Nice.
and it was interesting. But just that realization, because it was like, yeah, that was like new information to me, and that's a whole new branch of timeline that gets to be healed.
Right. Right, because even if you're not, so my mom passed when I was 3. So how much of an impact did she have on my upbringing? And yet I had mother wounds. I mean, of course, the passing, that trauma had to be dealt with, but I had to go and heal hers and my father's, together had a wound of shame that it was very interesting in healing that.
Mm.
Very, very interesting. Yeah.
I do want to ask about the Dragon Rider.
We'll do that after this. So, so now you work with people with their diet, with their mindset.
Mindset primarily, and sometimes, yeah, there's overlap into diet, and taking a look at the way that I operate is, I'll ask my clients what their goal is, and we'll start there. What is your goal? Then
Right.
we'll look at, is their life in alignment to achieve it, or what areas need to shift in order to support that goal. And then what we find is that it will branch out into all areas of your life. So if your focus is business success, how is your health? How are your relationships?
Right.
How is your self-care, right? Because that all ties together. So yeah, like diet ends up being a byproduct of that, right? So if your goal is weight loss, what is your diet? What is your routine. If it's to, be more fit, same thing, right? Is your diet in alignment with the goal itself?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all other aspects, right? Is your mentality in the right space? Are you looking at things from possibility and from potential versus, victim of circumstance? And to really take control of that, because once you recognize that our reality is based on our decisions and our choices, then you can change it. Then you can differently.
Right. And part of forgiveness is letting go of that energy from the past.
Yes.
Right. Which has a lot to do with food choices. I will eat based on what the universe tells me I should be eating.
Mm.
So, I can't say that I'm plant-based. I am right now, but, steak started tasting terrible to me.
Mm.
Right. And, I'm sorry, but a nice prime rib, I would dive right into it right now. The thought of it is like, no, I don't think so. Right. Chicken tastes awful to me right now. But that's because right now I need a plant-based diet.
Yeah. Your
Right.
body's aligned and you're able to listen to it and
Yep.
override the
Right.
conscious conditioning of like steak is delicious anytime.
Right. Typically, but right now it's not. So anyway, so how can people get in touch with you if they want to know more, Jeff?
Yeah. Food for thought with, like you said, a four. Food number 4 thought 408.com is my website. And then if you are viewing this, then the QR code, you can scan that, and there is a beacons page that takes you to all my social media. So I have YouTube channel, Instagram, TikTok, and then you can view some of my content. And in podcasts and recordings like this, I break down into smaller segments so you can view kind of my own train of thought and how I think, if that's something you would want support with from an individual like me.
Awesome. Fantastic. And all of that will be in the show notes. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to us. This is Gail Craft from the Empowering Process Podcast. If this really interested you and you have some questions, do let us know. Give us a thumbs up if you like it. If you know someone who could benefit from this, do share it out. And as always, I do ask you to subscribe so you know when the next episode is available. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Empowering Process Podcast. Be sure to visit Gail at gailcraft.com to learn more about how she serves thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and goal seekers. And remember, if you like this broadcast, be sure to share and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.